أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Mediation Analysis. Introduction. Mediation occurs when a construct referred to as your mediator construct intervenes between two related constructs. Now, more precisely, a change in the exogenous construct causes a change in the mediator construct, which in turn results in change in the endogenous construct in the PLS path model. When such an effect is present, mediation can be useful statistical analysis if supported by theory and carried out properly. Consider this figure for illustration of mediating effect in terms of direct and indirect effects. A direct effect describes the relationship linking two constructs with a single arrow. Now this is your direct relationship y1, y3, y1, y2, y2, y3. Indirect effects are those structural model paths that involve a sequence of relationship with at least one intervening construct. Now look at this. There is a sequence of relationship between y1, y2 and y3. y1 influences y2, y2 influences y3. So your y2 is your mediator construct or mediating variable. In this case, we only have one intervening construct, but there could be more than one. In testing if mediation or the presence of a mediator in a model, you will actually need to understand some of the terminologies, which are direct effect, indirect effect, and total effects. Now have a look here. This C actually represents the relationship between X and Y, and this is the total effect. Why? Because there is no other variable in the model, and the effect of X and Y can be referred to as the total effect. Now here, the relationship between X and Y is represented by a C complement, and this relationship here is referred to as direct effect because some of the effect may be passing through this other variable, which is the mediating variable. So what happens is X influences M and M influences Y. Now in this case, a direct effect is simply a direct relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable in presence of the mediator and is represented by C complement. So the influence of X on Y in presence of a mediator is represented by C complement, and this is referred to as direct effect. Here it was total effect because there was no mediator present. An indirect effect is the relationship that flows from an independent variable to a mediator and then to the dependent variable and is calculated by multiplying A into B. So your indirect effect is actually the relationship that flows from X to M, which is your mediator, and M to Y, where the relationship from X to M is represented by A and M to Y is represented by B. And you can calculate your indirect relationship by multiplying A into B. So the term total effect is actually the combined effect, that is your direct effect and your indirect effect. So if you add your direct effect, that is C complement, and you add your indirect effect, which you can calculate by multiplying A and B. So if you add these, you will get your total effect. So this here is your direct effect, and the effect flowing from X to M to Y is your indirect effect. Now without the mediator, the effect of X on Y is referred to as the total effect. Now there are different forms of indirect effects. There could be partial mediation, when some of the effect is passing through M and some of the effect is passing directly. When the indirect path from X to M and M to Y is significant, and the direct path here is also significant. So this is partial mediation. Full mediation is where you have a significant indirect effect from X to Y. That is, your impact on X on Y is passing through your variable M. However, your direct effect is insignificant. That is, the effect from X to Y is insignificant. The whole effect of X on Y is actually passing through this third variable, which we call M. In this case, we can call it full mediation because all of the effect is passing through this particular variable or the mediating variable M. In this case, some of the effect was passing directly while some of the effect was indirect. So what is complementary mediation? Complementary mediation is where the indirect effect, that is the effect passing through M, and the direct effect, that is the impact of X on Y in presence of the mediator, both have similar influence. For example, both having a positive influence. In this case, we call it complementary mediation. However, competitive mediation is where the indirect effect, that is the effect of X on Y through M, and the direct effect, that is the effect of X on Y, they have dissimilar influence. What do we mean by dissimilar influence? The direct effect is negative, as in the example, and the indirect effect is positive. So they have different signs. In this case, we call it competitive mediation. Now, how do we test mediation? The research by Barron and Kenny in 1986 was one of the fundamental frameworks for how to test mediation. Over the years, research has refined their initial work on testing mediation. I think it's a worthy pursuit to discuss where mediation testing started and where it progressed today. Barron and Kenny stated that there were 4 steps in testing mediation. Number 1. Make sure that X has a significant influence on Y, that is your C path in absence of M must be significant. Your step 2. It tests that X has a significant influence on M, that is your A path, and no Y is included. This needs to be significant as well. Your step 3. It tests that X has a significant influence on M and M has a significant influence on Y. Both A and B are significant. And your step 4. It tests the direct and indirect relationship simultaneously and determines if and what type of indirect effect is present. A, B and C paths are all being evaluated. So you've got your IV, your DV and the mediator in the same model. Now what are the criticisms on Barron-Kenny approach? The first is, the Barron and Kenny method was based on finding the unstandardized coefficients for each relationship and then determining significance using Sobel test. As the research has progressed, this method of testing mediation has changed and Sobel testing has been rejected as a valid means of testing mediation. Even in the initial steps outlined by Barron and Kenny, these have changed as well. The first step, that the C path needs to be significant, is not a requirement anymore. Your indirect effects can be present even if a non-significant C path is initially found. So even though your total effect initially, the impact of X on Y, is insignificant, you can still have a significant indirect effect. The justification is based on the idea that there are suppressor effects that prevent the C path from being significant, but the indirect effect is still present. The idea that A path and B path have to individually be significant have been rejected as well. Hayes in 2018 notes that indirect effect is the product of A and B, and the statistical significance of either A or B is not a requirement for the mediation. So your A and B path may be insignificant, but still you can have a significant indirect effect. Now how do we test mediation? The revised method is now concerned with assessing the indirect effect by examining the product of A path and the B path while controlling for the direct effect of the C path. Now since the Sobel test is flawed for this type of test, the more accepted approach in mediation testing is to use a bootstrap technique to determine significance. A bootstrap technique treats your data sample like a pseudo population and takes a random sample with a replacement to determine if your indirect effect falls within the confidence interval. So what you are doing is you are actually treating your whole sample as a new population, whereby through random number generation that particular sample is used to generate another sample. Maybe 5,000, 10,000, 1,000 or any number of bootstrap samples are generated. So your normal recommendation is 5,000. Note that with the bootstrap sample, the computer program will generate a completely different sample every time you run the analysis. So that's why every time you will run your bootstrap analysis, you will have some differences in your results. Systematic mediation analysis. Evaluation of the mediation model. Now, evaluating a mediation model requires all quality criteria of measurement and structural models to be met. Now, as discussed in the previous sessions, the analysis begins with the assessment of reflective formative measurement model. Now, before you go on and assess the mediation role of the mediating variable, you need to assess or evaluate your measurement model, whether it's reflective or formative, as we've done in previous sessions. For example, a lack of reliability for one or more reflective mediator constructs will have a meaningful impact on the estimated relationship in the PLS path model. That is, the indirect effects can be considerably smaller than expected if you do not check your constructs for reliability. Now, for this reason, it is very important to ensure that the reflectively measured mediator constructs exhibit a high level of reliability. Now, after establishing the reliability and validity of measurement models for the mediator as well as the other exogenous and endogenous construct, it is now important to consider all structural model evaluation criteria that we did in previous sessions. You have to check for collinearity, you will have to assess for explanatory power and the structural relationships as well. High collinearity must not be present since it is like to produce biased path coefficient. Now, it is important to check for high collinearity. For example, as a result of collinearity, the direct effect may become insignificant, suggesting the absence of mediation even though, for example, complementary mediation may be present. Likewise, high collinearity levels may result in unexpected sign changes, rendering any differentiation between different mediation types problematic. Moreover, a lack of the mediator construct's discriminant validity with the exogenous or endogenous construct might result in a strong and significant but substantially biased indirect effect, consequently leading to incorrect implications regarding the existence of or type of mediation. Now, after meeting the relevant assessment criteria for reflective and formative measurement model, as well as a structural model by testing the collinearity and other required statistics, the actual mediation analysis follows. Mediation analysis procedure. Now, what is the procedure of mediation analysis? Is P1 and P2 significant? Now, yes, they are significant. Then assess, is P3 significant? That is the direct relationship from your independent variable to your dependent variable, whereas P1 is your relationship from independent to mediator and P2 is your relationship from mediator to dependent. If P3 is significant, now we check for complementary or competitive mediation. Now, if P1, P2 and P3, all of them are positive, you've got complementary partial mediation. Otherwise, you've got competitive partial mediation. Again, if P3 is not significant, you've got full mediation. That is, your direct effect is insignificant and all the influence is passing on the dependent variable through the mediator. But what if your P1 and P2 are insignificant? That is no. Then is P3 significant? Then there is only a direct only relationship. And if your P3 is not significant, that is your direct relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, then there is no effect, no mediation whatsoever. Thank you very much.